Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. My name is Yeonmi Park. I'm a North Korean defector and human rights activist. So today I have a very special episode with a special guest. So Alex Glaston is a Chief Strategy Officer at Human Rights Foundation. We have been working on a lot of projects in the past regarding North Korea, but today we are finally going to talk about the Bitcoin. I think Alex can talk about in a very interesting perspective because I think you are the really only one right now talking about Bitcoin and individual liberty. And I think, right, most of people now are talking about how much the money they can make out of it. But
hmm
I really loved how much you thought it could empower people who are oppressed.
Yeah. Thank you for having me, Yeonmi. It's been so much fun to work with you on different projects over the years. I would say that there are a lot of Bitcoin users, or as
Mm-hmm.
we call them, Bitcoiners, who care deeply about liberty. Actually, I would say that most of the people who develop Bitcoin, Bitcoin is an open source software project. There's no corporation behind Bitcoin, and we can get into that a little bit more. But basically, there are a lot of people who devote their career to building Bitcoin and maintaining it, and they do it not for profit. They could make a lot more money working for Google or Facebook or Amazon or Twitter or whatever. They do this because they care about liberty and they care about money that's independent from governments and corporations.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm very honored to be mentioned alongside of them and many others. But you are correct that, yes, most people who are into Bitcoin are for a surface level appreciation of it, which is fine, that it's a good investment. And that's
Mm-hmm.
fine. And that's as far as a lot of people are going to go with it. And that's
Mm-hmm.
okay. But if you go deeper, you realize it's this tool for human freedom. And
Mm-hmm.
then if you go even deeper than that, which is what we can do here, it's going to have a big impact on geopolitics and how nations interact with each other. So
Right.
these are like different layers of Bitcoin. We'll start with the top layer. What is Bitcoin? Why is a human rights activist interested in it, right? Well, most people are interested in Bitcoin because it's gone from zero to $60,000 since
Yeah.
2009. And I think it's important to understand the history of Bitcoin. So, if
Mm,
that's okay, Yomi, I'll go
of
into it a little bit
course.
here. In the 1980s, people in the United States and in Europe realized that there was going to be a problem. They realized that the rise of the computer
Mm,
would potentially harm freedom and human rights. They realized that there was going to be a lot of surveillance and a lot of spying on our activities in a way that wasn't really possible before computers, right? In North Korea, the government, has to sort of do it manually, right?
right.
They don't have
Yeah.
as sophisticated equipment as the
Right.
Chinese or the Americans, right? Now they're getting more equipment these days, but like especially when you were living there, it's like it was manual surveillance in many
Mm,
cases, right? That's not the case anymore, and people in the 1980s could see this. They could predict that the events of 1984, the book
mm,
that Orwell wrote, could actually take place through computers, through the digitization of society.
uh-huh.
So there were like two ways to fight that. One way is to ask your government very nicely to not violate your rights and freedoms. So this is what we call the lobbying approach or
Mm,
regulation. Okay, the government
mm,
should regulate and protect citizen rights, and they should
mm,
regulate Facebook and tell them to stop stealing my information, and they should regulate Twitter and regulate all these things. So there are people who have this philosophy of like, let's regulate it, like let's make laws to protect people. Now, I have a problem with that philosophy because it doesn't work for everybody. Not
mm,
everybody has a democracy. So obviously North Koreans being the prime example, but like 4.3 billion people don't live under, they live under an authoritarian regime. This idea of like, let's just go to the government and try and negotiate with them to
mm,
like have them not spy on us.
yeah.
First of all, it doesn't work in dictatorships, but as Edward Snowden revealed, it doesn't even work in democracies. Like governments are going to spy on you whenever they can, is what we've
Mm,
learned. This strategy doesn't work, and people knew it wasn't going to work in the 80s. So a group of freedom activists got together in the late 1980s, early 1990s, and they were called the Cypherpunks. Okay, the Cypherpunks are
um,
people who use open source code to protect our freedoms. Okay, so the first cypherpunk tool really was something called PGP, or Pretty Good Privacy. So PGP was something that allowed two PC users anywhere in the world, really, to trade a private message with one another using
mhm,
code. open source code that couldn't be stopped. And the creator of PGP was a guy named Phil Zimmerman, okay, still around. And at the time, this was when Bill Clinton was president of the United States. And at the time, Bill Clinton and Joe Biden, who was in this at the time, they really didn't like this. They were like, this is bad. This privacy stuff is going to be used by criminals and terrorists and pedophiles. It's going to be bad. So they like tried to stop Phil Zimmerman. But the problem is with open source code on computers, like you can't really stop it. It's free speech. It's basically like you can just repeat it. So what they did is the activists, the cypherpunks, started printing the code on books and T-shirts and email signatures, and they basically made it clear to the government that you can't stop this thing. And the government couldn't stop it, and open source code won. And cryptography, which is the science of secret messages, became standard. It allowed e-commerce to boom. You could now like encrypt a credit card information, and when you transmitted information with a purchase, a merchant on the internet. So it allowed like the rise of e-commerce and all these other things. It helped give birth to like the field of internet security and all this stuff. So cryptography is so important, and it's the reason why today, like on our phones, we have Signal. So on Signal, we can like send each other a private message. So the government can see that like Alex sent Yeonmi, maybe they know that I sent you a message at like 2 p.m., but they don't know what's inside of it. They don't know what I actually told you, okay? So they might have some metadata, but they can't actually see what's inside the phone, and that's so important. So the cypherpunks were like committed to preserving freedom in the digital world, and their first task was private messaging, to create freedom of expression and communication in the digital world, and they succeeded, and now we have that. Their like holy grail, though, their like big mission was digital cash. They wanted to be able to transact online, but with the properties of paper money. So if you think about paper money, when you buy something with paper money, the $20 bill at the store, or a Korean won note or whatever, like the merchant doesn't know anything about you. They don't know what you bought last, or what you're going to buy next, or what your name is, or your address, or your email, or your phone number. They don't know any of this stuff. They just know that you paid, right? So you've given them the money, and they've taken it, and then you walk out of the store. Historically, this was fine. This was like tradition. This was okay. But today we've been replacing the cash with a swipe or a scan or a chip or this like interaction digitally, which reveals all this information about us to the outside world. I'll give you an example from my personal life. A couple years ago, I noticed that I went to the pet food store to buy treats for my dog. They were like toothbrush-shaped treats, so little funny treats. Okay, so I used my credit card. This was not an online purchase. I was at a physical brick-and-mortar store. I stuck my card in the machine. I pulled it out. I left. A few minutes later, on Instagram, I saw that I got an advertisement for a very similar dog-shaped type treat. Now, I was able to deduce that it wasn't like my phone tracking my location, because it wasn't for, I was at a pet food store. I could have bought cat food or something else. Like it knew that it was the dog treats that were toothbrush shaped. So I did more research, and I realized that Chase, the company that runs my credit card, actually shares the transaction data with these data markets around the world when you buy things immediately. It just goes up into this cloud, okay? So the reason I got hit with that advertisement on Instagram was because Chase shares my transactional behavior with other people, okay? So in democracies, anything you do digitally, when you buy something online or use your credit card or your Apple Pay, all that stuff is like totally known by other actors and surveilled. And it's obviously a much more difficult cost to people in China and in dictatorships. Like when they do digital transactions, it's like the government is looking very carefully, and if you do anything wrong, they will freeze your account and punish you. So we have more freedoms in America, but still there's like the trends are bad. Like the trends that people predicted in the 1980s have happened. Like we live in a surveillance state, right? All over. It's just a matter of how many rights do we have to fight back? But like we live in a surveillance state. Now again, the cypherpunks gave us tools to fight back, right? So whereas I don't really believe in necessarily our ability to like, please, U.S. government, stop spying on me. I don't know how effective that is. Certainly not very effective in North Korea or China. But open source code is effective everywhere. So at least we have the tools to fight back. We can use Signal. We can use like Tor, which is a way of browsing the web privately. We can have hardware that's like more private. So if you have a cell phone that's an Android, you can download an operating system like Graphene, for example, which like gets rid of all the tracking stuff. So there's ways that we can fight back. Okay, background I wanted to start with, and essentially, again, the cypherpunks, like their end goal was digital cash, right? They really wanted the ability to transact online in a more private way, right? So the cypherpunks were like a bunch of different coders and programmers throughout the years. They kept trying to like tinker with and engineer digital cash, and they failed. They never really could figure it out. The closest anyone got was in 2004. Someone named Hal Finney created something called reusable proof of work, which is like I know it's like a word salad, but essentially it was like a way to start approximating what would later become Bitcoin. And one of the cypherpunks, we don't know who they are. We don't know whether they're a man or a woman, or whether they're Korean or American, or whether it's a group of people named Satoshi Nakamoto, came up with the solution. They actually found the Holy Grail. They created digital cash in Bitcoin, and they released it on a scientific white paper in October of 2008, and they started running the code in January of 2009. And it was like timed with the great financial crisis in the world. This is actually quite important. Bitcoin is not just a tool for privacy, and I would say that to achieve privacy in Bitcoin, you actually have to be quite careful. And we can get into that a little bit. But more than that, Bitcoin is a tool about financial freedom. So,
What do you mean?
yeah, so basically, creator Satoshi launched Bitcoin right at a time when the governments in the world were printing a lot of money to save the banks, to bail out the banks, right? And she or he or whoever it was thought this was very unfair. Okay, so that sort of process ends up hurting the little people, and it helps people at the top. So this is an effect known as the Cantillon effect, named after an economist from a long time ago, who noticed that when you print money, the people closest to the money printer benefit fast, and then later on, people down below, maybe it trickles down to them, but they don't benefit as much, and they can even get hurt from this, okay? So the Cantillon effect is important to think about, and in the very first block of the Bitcoin blockchain, which is just a bunch of transactions in a ledger, right? There is a commentary that Satoshi put in about the chancellor in Britain printing a bunch of more money to bail out the banks. So we know that Bitcoin was this political project at the beginning, not just to like achieve digital cash, but really to achieve financial freedom and to prevent governments from printing more of our money. That's really what it was invented to. So we use a word called debasement for this. So this comes from the ancient days of kings when they used to have coins made out of gold or silver, and they would do something called coin clipping. And they would take some of the gold or silver out of the coin. Let's say it was a 10 pence coin or something like that, right? So, okay, it would be worth, it would have a particular amount of silver in it or whatever, or gold. What they would do is they would clip some of the silver or gold out, steal it, and then they would put it back into the market, still worth the same, okay? So this is also known as seigniorage, okay? So very important, because coin clipping or debasement is a way that the rulers have stolen from the people for centuries. So this is still happening today, most famously not in the United States or in Europe, but in many countries around the world, like North Korea or Ethiopia or Venezuela or Zimbabwe or Iran. Unfortunately, in many countries, there's like double or triple digit inflation, whereby like basically, I'll put it to you simply, in North Korea, when you're paid for a job, you're paid like a certain amount of won for that particular task. But what happens is the government is doing the coin clipping. So over time, that won shrinks in terms of purchasing power. It gets less valuable over time, very dramatically sometimes in a place like North Korea. So actually what's happening is the time and energy that you're putting in and the fruits of your labors that you're getting are getting weakened, and the value is being shrunk by the government. They're stealing from, okay, straight up stealing, okay? Now, this is debatable in terms of its impact in a modern economy like the United States or Europe. We could have debates about saving the banks or quantitative easing or targeting a particular inflation rate that's low. Like we could all debate this, but what's not debatable is that like 1.2 or 3 billion people in the world live under a double or a triple digit inflation rate, where it's like their money's literally collapsing in front of their eyes, right? So that is like financial repression. And
Right.
Bitcoin was invented primarily to fight that. Okay, so that is like the freedom it gives you. With Bitcoin, you can be your own bank and you can
Mm-hmm.
prevent against governments from debasing you and from seizing your funds remotely. You can protect it yourself. And it also gives you an ability to use this kind of parallel economy where you and I can transact without them knowing what we're doing. So that's why Bitcoin is a tool for human rights and freedom.
Wow, that's that's remarkable. I mean, I think for two questions that I heard the most when I talked about Bitcoin in the past was like the one mainly was what is the intrinsic value of Bitcoin?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and there's like I cannot see it. I don't like how do I believe that it's worth something? What's your answer to that?
Well, let's think about it historically. A good comparison to Bitcoin is gold. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Now, at one point in the Korean Peninsula, in California, where I am, gold was just a rock. It wasn't worth
Mm-hmm.
anything because humans didn't value it, right? So eventually, over time, humans realized that gold was quite useful because it was very rare and you couldn't just make more of it. There's this idea that
Mm-hmm.
we've always had of alchemy to like turn something else into gold. Never
Mm-hmm.
worked. No scientist could ever figure it out. So gold has been quite rare. You have to like expend a lot of energy to dig it out of the ground. It's very expensive to make, right? So people realized that gold was a good store of value and ended up being a
Mm-hmm.
good currency, great currency, the best currency the world had ever seen, actually. So gold ended up being so dominant that it has a name, the gold standard, and the world ran on this for many centuries. Okay, um, but it was a gradual process of like what we call monetization. Like it took probably well, obviously it took thousands of years for people to go from kind of discovering it to realizing it could be useful in commerce to realizing it could be useful as the foundation for a banking system to reaching its real peak in value, which was really in the 1970s compared to like other goods. I know that
Ah.
it's like higher in dollar terms today,
Uh-huh.
but dollars have like devalued a lot as well. So really, like gold reached its like apex of value in the 1970s, and it took a long, long time
Mm-hmm.
humans around the world to agree on the value of gold. Right? It took a long time. Bitcoin is doing that, but instead of thousands of years, it's doing that in a couple decades because
Mm-hmm.
it's an information technology. Um, all technologies have an adoption curve, what we call
Mm-hmm.
an S curve, where like at the beginning, um, they essentially have like very few adopters, and then eventually there's
Mm-hmm.
like a rise, and then they go up and they kind of get towards 80, 90%, and they never get to 100% adoption, but like they flatten off. So this S shape is what
Huh.
the airplane, the car, the washing machine. Over time you go from 2%, 3%, 5%, 10%. So old school things, gold obviously
Mm-hmm.
took a long time. It was a very flat curve, right? It was a very flat, fat S that took like
Mm-hmm.
thousands of years. So things like the car, the airplane, the washing machine, the refrigerator, these have like a wider S curve because they're industrial. They just took longer to adapt. Information technologies are much steeper in terms of their
Mm-hmm.
adoption, like the internet, email, mobile phones, Bitcoin. I mean, these are things that where you see people adopt them much faster. Okay,
Uh-huh.
so if you compare Bitcoin's adoption, so about from what we understand, 200 million people, sort of at most, have used Bitcoin so far in its first 12 years of existence.
200 million, you said?
200 million. Yeah, so there's 43 million Americans right now that own Bitcoin alone, okay, according
Haha.
to Newsweek yesterday. So, about 20 something percent of Americans already own Bitcoin. And then you start to think about there's 10 million users in India, several million, and there's many millions in Turkey, the Philippines. China has many millions of users. The
Mm.
EU has tens of millions of users. So you start to add it all up, and we can look at exchange data and wallet data, and we can kind of come to an estimate that we're probably at around 200 million people who've ever like used Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's like less than 3% of the world's population, but it's only been 12 years. So if you actually compare it to like the internet,
Mm-hmm.
it's at a similar adoption rate. Okay, so we're
Oh,
still at like the bottom of the adoption curve.
really?
Yeah, so people like me believe that we're going to be at 1 billion users of Bitcoin by probably 2025.
20, that soon you think you're
In
gonna be
3 to 4 years, I think we're going to be at 1 billion users. Yeah.
1 billion.
Yeah. And then by 2030, we'll probably be at several billion. Like, we'll be getting close to half the world's population using it, is what I believe. So
Fascinating.
it is something that, to get back to your question about what is the intrinsic value?
Exactly.
Well, the intrinsic value of gold was that it could store value over time and you couldn't make more of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
That led us humans to assign it value, right?
Right.
Well, Bitcoin is like way better than gold in almost every way. Okay. To me, it's much more valuable than gold. Today, Bitcoin is worth about $1.2 trillion, all the Bitcoin. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So gold is worth about, all the gold in the world is worth about $10 trillion.
That's it.
That's a lot. That's a lot, right? So
Yeah.
so Bitcoin is at like 12% of gold. So
Mm.
people like me believe that over the next decade, Bitcoin will suck up a lot of the value of gold and gold will get cheaper. So like there
Uh,
is like two use cases for gold. There's like a monetary use case, like a store of value, and then there's an industrial sort of ornamental use case.
mm.
People always use gold for jewelry and for like robotics and for it's an important metal.
Mm-hmm.
But if it was just an important metal, it wouldn't be worth $10 trillion. It'd probably be
Right.
worth like $1 trillion. The reason it's so valuable is because people use it as like a store of value. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so the thing is, Bitcoin is way better than gold for a lot of reasons. Let's think about it. Gold is very clunky. It's hard to move around. You need to like hire
Mm-hmm.
people with guns to like protect it. You have to like store it in the ground. Oftentimes,
Mm-hmm.
all you end up doing is digging it out of the ground in one place, only to put it back down in in the ground in another place. Like, it's hard to leave a country like North Korea with your gold. Like, it's not so
Mm-hmm.
easy. Um, it uh, it is prone to centralization and capture by authorities. Like, it's hard to hide your gold, so people can come steal it from you. In 1933, the United States government under FDR made it illegal for citizens to hold gold. It was called Executive Order 6102. Only in the 1970s did it become legal again. So, and then during that time, between the 30s and the 70s, government sucked up all the gold and they centralized it. And the US government held almost all the gold for everybody in the whole world. That kind of activity is not possible with Bitcoin. Bitcoin
Mm.
is way easier to store. It's invisible. It doesn't weigh anything. You can store it with a number. Okay. You can store your private key. You can control the ability to move your Bitcoin with a phrase that you can memorize or write down on a piece of paper or store with a friend or split up into different pieces and give to different people. It can teleport around the world in minutes. Gold
Mm-hmm.
you put on a ship. Um, it can upgrade. It's programmable. Gold you obviously cannot upgrade. I mean, it is what it is, for better or worse. Um, and then the big thing is Bitcoin's even more scarce than gold. So gold increase. There's people keep digging gold out of the ground every year at about a rate of 2%, what we call stock to flow. So
Mm.
2 more % of gold is like added to the amount that's extant in the world each year. But one day we're going to get up to like a space asteroid and we're going to find out that there's a ton of gold. And basically that's going to like flood the market. This, may not happen for many decades, but like eventually we know there's a ton of gold in outer space. So there is a lot of gold out there. It's just like we haven't been able to get it yet. And when we do get it, it'll like really drop the price of gold. Okay. Bitcoin is absolutely scarce. There will only ever be 21 million. So Bitcoin is
Mm-hmm.
much more rare than gold. Okay. So that's like a big, big deal. In addition to the fact that it can teleport and you can control it much easier, and it's much better for protecting against confiscation and censorship, um, and it's also programmable. These are all
Mm-hmm.
things that make it, in my mind, an even better intrinsic value than gold. Like, I believe that everybody who uses gold today on Earth for like as a wedding gift in different societies and cultures, gold is used as like dowry or whatever. Gold is used to store a family wealth for decades. Like, they're all going to switch to Bitcoin. Like, Bitcoin has a much higher intrinsic value than gold for all the reasons I listed. Its properties are just simply better. It's a better way of storing. Like, gold is very good at storing value over time. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then fiat money, like the money that governments print, is very good for storing money over space. So, like, I can send you
Mm.
Venmo right now, and it goes from wherever you are to wherever I am pretty fast.
Mhm.
The problem is for most people, their national currency doesn't store value over time very well. Like as we were discussing with North Korea, like it
Yeah.
sometimes it goes to zero, they demonetize completely. So gold is good for storing value over time. Very good. I mean, in fact, in ancient Babylon, I believe an ounce of gold bought you the same amount of bread that it does today in San Francisco. Uh, like in ancient Rome, like the same amount of gold would buy you a beer as it does today, roughly. So like gold has held its purchasing power for like a long, long time. It's very good at
Wow.
that. But it's not good for storing value over space. Like it's hard to transact.
Right.
So Bitcoin does both. Bitcoin's even better at storing value over space than fiat because it can
Mm.
literally be instant with Lightning Network. And it's better at storing value over time than gold because it's absolutely scarce. And we can
Mm.
I mean, Bitcoin has gone from 0 to 60,000. Gold
Right.
has gold has gone from in that same span. It's done pretty well. It's gone from
Mm.
like 1200 to 1900, which is pretty good, but
Mm-hmm.
not as good as Bitcoin, not even close. So
Yeah.
people like me believe that Bitcoin has a much higher intrinsic value than gold is the way to answer that.
So I mean, I know a lot of people are gonna be also very interested in like price, prediction.
Sure.
What do you think is the prediction for Bitcoin?
I mean, no one knows. That's the beautiful thing. We have no clue. Most Bitcoin users did not predict what has happened in the past year, where
Yeah.
we've seen like corporations like come out like Tesla and say they're going to like have 5% of Bitcoin on their balance sheet just in case there's inflation.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously there's inflation. Like we're having inflation in the United States right now. It's pretty
Yeah.
dramatic actually. I mean, it's not as dramatic as what people are experiencing in Nigeria or in Argentina or in Turkey.
Right.
Uh, Most humans on this planet deal with very high inflation, but it's getting there. With goods and services
Mm.
getting very expensive in the United States, healthcare, education, even recently cost of construction stuff, and you're just going to see it soon in other things too, right?
Mm-hmm.
So corporations that are smart are seeing this happen and they're saying, well, just in case that gets out of hand, let's take 5% of the cash we have on our balance sheet, put it into Bitcoin. Okay.
Huh.
Um, a lot more corporations are going to do that. And then
Yeah.
eventually central banks of governments are going to do that. So today, um, central banks save in the treasury bill, essentially, or in the dollar, right? So 60% of all foreign exchange reserves, meaning if you added up all the wealth of all the different governments in the world and they keep them in their central bank, right? 60% of all of the wealth they have is stored in dollars, either dollar assets, dollar debt, right? Then like the euro is like about 20%, and then everything else, there's like a long tail of other currencies, okay? Um, Eventually these other governments, some of them are already moving away from the dollar. So Russia and China are
Mm.
dollarizing. They are now accumulating gold, rubles, yuan. They're trying to get out of the dollar system, partly because they're adversarial, right? They don't like the United
Mm.
States, but also partly because they don't believe in the United States' ability to keep its dollar so valuable in the future. They've watched America build this huge deficit on wars,
Mm.
social programs, and they've said, I don't know, man. I don't know if these bonds, I don't know if buying US debt is a very good idea anymore.
Right.
So in
Right.
2014, China stopped buying US debt. So now they've been like
Ah.
disgorging ever since. They used to buy all our debt. They bought more than $1 trillion of our debt. They've started to like downsize their position there. They're not buying our debt anymore. In fact, the number one consumer of our debt is our central bank, the Fed. The Fed buys half of all of our new debt. Okay. So there's issues here that other countries are like, I don't know, in the same way that in the late 1960s, when the world operated on what was called the Bretton Woods standard, which is where like the dollar was pegged to gold at 35
Mm.
ounce, $35 per ounce. Okay. And then all these countries like would store their gold with the US, and then they'd have their dollars and they could come redeem their dollars for the gold if they were worried. Okay. So Charles de Gaulle, the French president, and the British, and in the late 60s, they were watching the U.S. spend all this money on Vietnam War and on social programs, the Great Society, and they were like, I don't know, it's not looking good. Like, I don't know if they can hold the gold peg. So at the end of the day, in 1971, the French sent a battleship to New York City to try and get their gold back. Um, and a few days later, Richard Nixon, who was president of the United States, he closed the gold window, meaning he took the world off the gold standard, and he said that dollars are no longer going to be redeemable for gold. So he broke the system, and then we've been on this sort of treasury bill standard ever since. We were on the gold standard, then we were on the Bretton Woods standard, which was like the dollar pegged to gold, and then ever since 71, we've been on the treasury bill standard, basically, which is like U.S. dollars and debt are like what people save in. That's not going to last forever. So what I'm saying is I think what's next is probably the Bitcoin standard. So I think that central banks, including allies and foes, so enemies, Bitcoin is the money of enemies, basically. So all governments will start realizing they need to accumulate Bitcoin in their central bank, and they're going to start stacking it in a competitive way. So because I believe that corporations and governments and individuals increasingly through their retirement accounts, I mean, Americans have trillions of dollars of assets in 401ks and other things. A lot of that's going to start moving into Bitcoin. Out of bonds and debt, a lot of this stuff has negative real yield, meaning like you end up spending money to save your money. Like it's actually kind of insane. There's like negative interest rate bank accounts in Europe and stuff. You're paying the bank for the pleasure of me parking my money with you. So people are looking at this stuff and they're like, I'm going to go put some of my money into Bitcoin. Can't print more of it. Okay, it's scarce.
Right.
Okay, so I think the value is going to go up very dramatically in the next 10 years. I mean, I won't put a number on it, but I do believe that the idea of owning a full Bitcoin will become a crazy kind of idea for the average person. I think.
Really?
Yeah, I don't want to put a number on it. I don't want people to like. I'm a human rights activist, not a price predictor. But I do think it'll become extremely valuable. Like most people in this world will not own a full Bitcoin. Like a full Bitcoin is like already today is a lot. The average American only has a small amount of savings or nothing at all. So already a full Bitcoin is beyond the ability of most people. So it moved pretty fast from like internet money that you could buy like just a couple of years ago you could buy a full Bitcoin for a couple $100, 200, $300. Today it's $60,000. So I think we continue to see dramatic incline. The good news is you can divide each Bitcoin into 100 million Satoshis. Okay, so a Satoshi is the smallest combination, and if there's going to be eventually 21 million Bitcoin, that's a lot of Satoshis. It's 2.1 quadrillion Satoshis. Or you can even split a Satoshi up into smaller pieces called an MSAT. So that's 2.1 quintillion 2.1 quintillion units of Bitcoin that we'll have available as a species. And that's more than all the money in the world. So there's plenty of units available for us in the future. And it can accommodate everybody. I mean, but the fact is, I think it's going to start becoming really obvious in the next 3 to 5 years this is happening. But right now we're at the beginning. We're like in the early 1990s of the internet. Like it's kind of wild, crazy, and everybody doesn't know what's going to happen with it. I remember as a kid, I was using my dial-up internet, and it was in the mid-90s, and it was obvious to me that this was going to change the world. There were still people writing in newspapers that the internet was stupid or the internet it wasn't going to work. I was sitting there dialing up and playing games with my friends, and I was like, this thing's going to be incredible. But I didn't, that's where we are now with Bitcoin. So you're like, if you're listening to this and you have some Bitcoin or learning about it, you are what we call an early adopter. You're like one of the earliest people to start interacting with this thing. Now, I think over the next 5 years that changes, and over the next 10 years, most people in the world will interact with it. But you're now an early adopter, is what I would say.
Wow, that's exciting. And so, I mean, for the last question, I have so many questions. Sorry. So, if I try to become, devil's advocate,
yes,
a lot of people have been asking me or so because I've been passionate about Bitcoin for a while and saying, that it's a tool for like dictators Kim Jong Un or like Iranian regime or a lot of other bad guys using this to evade sanction. And also, how do you, because Bitcoin empowers individuals, but also it seems like empowering really bad people.
Yeah, this is really important to discuss. We need to think about a comparison of encryption, so of private messaging. Okay, so private messaging is open source code, open to everybody. And indeed, what the Clinton administration said in the early 90s when they wanted to ban private messaging was that it would help bad people. It would help dictators and terrorists and all the bad people, pedophiles, drug traffickers, you name it. They were like, this thing is going to be bad. It's going to help all those people. To make my point clear, I'll just draw this little. I'll just draw a little something so you can understand what I'm getting at. To make it really clear to folks, the world is mostly good people. Okay, there's a small number of bad people, and then everybody else is good.
Yeah.
You know this very well because everybody says, "Oh, North Koreans must be so terrible," and you know that's not true. You know that almost all North Koreans are wonderful people, and there's just a small fraction of them that are bad, right? Okay, so think about that imagery, right? Bitcoin empowers everybody, okay?
Yeah.
So yes, in the short term, the North Korean government and the Venezuelan government and the Iranian government and the Russian government, Chinese government, they're going to use Bitcoin to like get around the U.S. financial system, okay?
Right.
However, this is a very short-sighted move. You have to think we are a species. We're going to be here for generations. Like we have to think about the long-term effects of what's happening here, or even just medium-term effects. Two things to keep in mind. Number one, eventually this is going to backfire for them in a spectacular way. Because listen, it's not like Kim Jong-un or Maduro or the mullahs in Iran are the ones figuring out the Bitcoin stuff. No, they like hire a whole bunch of other people to do it for them, right? So those people have to learn what it is. And then all of a sudden they're like, wait a second, this is money that the government doesn't control? Seriously? And then they start learning about it and they start telling their family and friends and it spreads like a virus, okay? So all of a sudden you have everybody in the 1% or in the 10% of society knowing about this thing. Then they need to move money offshore, or they need to help a friend, or they want to take some money out that the government doesn't know. All of a sudden it starts to spread. Spread. People talk about it. It's a virus. So it'll infect the host, okay? So it's almost like this Trojan horse is the way I put it. This is the terminology I like to use. It looks appealing for the dictator at first. Okay, they see this thing like, oh my gosh, like this thing is, quite powerful. And I even have an imagery for you guys. Let me bring it up that I've made a little meme. Given that we're in the age of memes, I will share.
I love that.
So as you can see here in this image, we have this Trojan horse that the Greeks have made, and the Trojans are making the mistake of bringing it inside their castle. The Trojans have been fighting for a decade against the Greeks. The Greeks are about to give up, and then they say, wait, we have one last idea. Let's try to fool them. So they present this gift outside the city walls, and you can think of the Trojans like the dictators, right? So the dictators look at this thing and they say, oh, this is great. This is going to make us rich. Let's bring it inside. And Bitcoin will make rich. Bitcoin will make, it is a very valuable thing. It's going to increase in value over time, especially against fiat currencies like the North Korean won, which is not very stable. Okay, so they bring the thing inside the city. What they don't realize is that inside is this powerful freedom tool, right? So that's what I'm describing here is that Bitcoin is a Trojan horse for freedom, and that dictators and other powerful people are going to see it simply as an investment, and they're going to want to get some, or they're going to want to use it to like get around U.S. financial regulations. And what they don't realize is it's like this virus that's going to start like spreading inside the host body. And then eventually many North Koreans and Iranians and Zimbabweans and Venezuelans start to use it for themselves. And then that's where we start to see this effect of like most people are good in the world and they start to be empowered, right? So Bitcoin is a financial liberation tool. So number one, it's a Trojan horse and it's going to backfire for these dictators. But number two, and North Korea is a very unique example given how closed of a society it is. But if we look at any other dictatorship, Bitcoin is already being used by like tons of people to protect themselves against the state, whether in China or in Iran. I just interviewed people for a magazine piece called Check Your Financial Privilege in Bitcoin Magazine, which I'll share with you. Maybe you can put in the show notes. It's profiles of people living in authoritarian regimes in Ethiopia, Sudan, and Nigeria, where they're in like either straight up dictatorships or like transitions to more open societies. And millions of people in these countries are already using Bitcoin to protect themselves against the state. It's like a shield, okay, to fight against monetary repression. So that's already happening. North Korea is a very special case, and it deserves our attention because it is the most repressive place in the world. But it's just a matter of time, Yeonmi. I mean, right now, I was talking about you with this earlier. It's really hard to send money back to your family, right? If you
Right.
are a South Korean who's escaped from North Korea, now you're a South Korean citizen, you're living there, you want to send money back, you have to go through all these brokers, you have to trust all these people. I mean, right now, like you could just send Bitcoin from your living room in Seoul to just one broker as opposed to having to go through all this huge network. And that person receives the Bitcoin on their phone on the North Korean side of the border with China. And then they call your relative and they, hey, got the money, like come pick up your cash. And they come and
Mm-hmm.
pick it up. Okay? Or they could even like give the Bitcoin to that person in the form of a seed phrase written down or in a
Interesting.
USB key. I mean, it can be used like a bearer asset. Like Bitcoin can
Wow.
be used as a USB key, just like in North Korea, as we know, like USB keys themselves can be valuable because of the contents within. Okay, well you can have more than just movies on that USB
Mm.
key. You can have money. Okay, you can have
Wow.
billions of dollars on a USB key. Okay, that can be exchanged in China. It's liquid in China. There are all kinds of people in China willing to buy the Bitcoin from you and give you whatever you want for it, yuan, dollars, etc. So it's
Mm-hmm.
just a matter of time before the brokers and people who are like getting information and goods and services in and out of North Korea start to realize the Bitcoin effect. It's going to happen at some point. And I think soon because South Koreans are very Bitcoin savvy.
Yeah.
Tons of South Koreans own Bitcoin. There's even something called the kimchi premium, which describes sometimes because of these like tight capital controls. Um,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes like the price in dollars of Bitcoin gets much more expensive in South Korea than other places because there's this huge retail demand for it. The
Mm-hmm.
kimchi. And then in China, I mean, China's got tons of Bitcoin users. So it's just a matter of time. Again, this virus that's going to spread around the world and promote financial freedom and empower people, it can't be stopped. So that's
Wow.
my comment on that. I do realize
Mm.
it's very nuanced, and people do need to understand that yes, all actors can and will use this, including all the bad ones. They
Mm-hmm.
just do have to realize that like most people are good,
Yeah.
and that even the bad actors who use it are going to get damaged by it because it
Right.
removes their ultimate power, which is their power to control citizens through the economy. It erodes that over time.
That was amazing. That was the best explanation I've ever heard on entire Bitcoin. Where do people can find you, Alex?
I appreciate you having me. I hope we can keep doing more
Oh,
of it. What you need to understand about Bitcoin is it's a journey. I
yeah.
first learned about it really in 2013. I didn't really grasp it until 2017. So it took me
Oh,
years, okay? And then it's
yeah.
taken me 5 years to be able to get to this point where I can talk to you like this about this
Right.
topic. So it's not something you can just like pick up today and know tomorrow. It is
Mm,
a journey. We call it a rabbit hole that you go down. We call it taking the orange pill. Like in the Matrix, you take that red pill, you start to look at everything around you differently.
yep.
But you need to do it. You need to learn. It's the future. So especially if you're a human rights activist, it's very important for your work. So I would
Mm,
encourage people to learn more about it. You can follow me on Twitter at Gladstein.
Gladstein. I
Um,
will put that in the link.
yeah,
Mm,
and I will enclose a couple articles that I've written for folks.
amazing.
And I'll make a couple suggestions. I really like a book called The Internet of Money.
Internet
Uh,
of money.
that
Okay.
people can
Mm,
read. I believe it's in all different languages. I also helped write a book called The Little Bitcoin Book, which is like an intro, which is in
mm,
Korean and Chinese and English.
mm.
Korean and Chinese, I believe, for free at thelittlebitcoinbook.com. And again, we'll put some of my work in the show notes. But I would encourage folks to reach out to me. I answer all my DMs on Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
Get in touch, and I'll try to help you however I can. And certainly interested in helping the North Korean people understand this technology, continuing to do this work with Yeonmi moving forward.
You're awesome. It's been amazing hearing you. I think I'm gonna have you back. I think so many people are gonna have a lot of questions. So guys, leave your questions in the comment or send Alex on
Yeah,
Twitter,
leave your
right?
questions, and then we'll come back and we'll just do a big question answering party.
Yeah, I can even have you over for the live sessions.
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah. So guys, thank you so much for spending your time to learn about this Bitcoin. I really think this is a future. As you heard from Alex today, I cannot wait to have Alex back and seeing you guys in the next video.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you. Okay.